Have the triumphs in your life been the result of your own choices, or are they merely the outcome of cosmic chance and there is nothing to be proud of? Were all your life failures destined and there is nothing you could have done about them? Did you choose to click on this video? What I offer is some unique perspectives on free will you might not have heard anywhere else, and if you're a free will skeptic, I have a message for you. You carry a great burden, and you have no choice but to stay tuned to find out what that burden is. Is the leftover tailbone enough by itself to convince someone that evolution is true? Probably not. How about the fossil evidence? Getting warmer, but there are still many gaps in the fossil record. And how about the genetic scars we share with chimps? That alone is enough to convince most of the evolution theory. All this evidence is in favor of evolution, but not all is equally convincing. Naturally, the same goes for free will. That's why I thought it would be an interesting idea to sort the evidence using a tier list. To start with, why is free will debated in the first place? The main reason is that people have a subjective experience of having an intention that manifests objectively as some form of an action. This experience may be subjective, but it is common to all of us as far as I know, which puts this evidence solidly in the B tier. However, is subjective evidence reliable? There are many different kinds of evidence depending on the journey it had to travel to reach our minds. Most is indirect evidence we have from others, and we can't possibly perform all the tests ourselves. Then there is empirical evidence, which is a direct observation. Every evidence is fundamentally subjective. It's just that we can sometimes agree that we both experience the same thing, an object, which we then go on to call empirical. However, free will and consciousness, which are the two powers of the self, are self-evident, a type of axiomatic evidence. Apes can recognize themselves in a mirror, much like a camera can take a photo of itself in a mirror. But we can become conscious of our own consciousness directly, like a camera that takes a photo of itself by itself. Without a mirror, it doesn't get any more direct than that. Likewise, we are directly conscious of making choices and experience them as free. I can't directly observe that in anyone other than myself, but everybody else seems to report to be able to do the same thing. This is why the axiomatic evidence lands solidly in the A tier. Speaking of the axiomatic consciousness and will, if we backtrack everything we know, we will end up with some fundamental knowledge we cannot question. Not only is an infinite regress of justification logically impossible, even if it was, it would be practically impossible, as we don't have infinite time nor processing power. On the other hand, if we backtrack all our actions, we run into the same problem. We cannot answer the why question forever. Eventually, we'll reach a summum bonum, which is Latin for the ultimate goal. Backtracking from both knowledge and action seems to point to the same direction, the direction of the self. This doesn't exhaustively prove that the self is axiomatic, however it does seem to imply that to some degree, which is why I think I will put it in the C tier. Consciousness is a prerequisite for any type of evidence to begin with. It cannot be an illusion, as you need to be conscious to experience illusions in the first place. It is impossible to doubt it. If you do, you undermine the very basis on which your doubt was put forward. But it doesn't end there. If there was no free will, how would you know you are not determined to believe a lie? If you had free will, you could choose to seek the truth, but as a materialist, you don't get that choice, or any choice for that matter, which puts self-defeating materialism in the A tier. Sometimes nature's orderliness reveals hidden symmetries, such as the prediction of antimatter through Dirac's equations, which was later confirmed by experimentation. A similar case can be made for free will. Just like matter acts and reacts, the self has free will and consciousness, which are like a reaction that does not alter through observation, and an action without external cause respectively. This makes the idea of the self less mysterious, as it is not something completely out of the ordinary, but has some similarity to matter. Furthermore, we can observe another type of symmetry. Consciousness can observe itself. Just try it. Are you conscious? If your answer is yes, you have just proven my point. Just like consciousness can observe itself, free will can cause itself, which shows a clear symmetry of self-referential behavior that cannot be observed in any material substance, thereby only being possible if the self was axiomatic. Together, the self allows us to see and act, creating a feedback loop that allows us to reshape the world around us. Theoretical symmetry by itself might not be enough to prove free will, but it is something certainly worth taking into consideration, which is why I'm going to place it in the B tier. For honorable mentions, I would just like to point out two things. First of all, it's very easy to imagine that we could exist without consciousness or free will, like biological automata. Why then did the illusion of free will evolve? In fact, if anything, it seems like a hindrance, as studies show that people who do not believe in free will tend to perform worse. D tier. 2 words. Occam's razor. It would be way simpler if free will was real. Not only would you not have to deal with the evolution of free will illusion problem, no one would have to go through an existential crisis. Furthermore, what's more likely? That the self is an illusion, there is no free will, and your life has no ultimate value nor purpose, or that some philosophers have gone astray. F tier. I gave numerous pieces of evidence and arguments for free will, some more and some less convincing. However, the real power reveals itself by considering all the evidence collectively. Even if all the evidence was weak, it could be strong when put together. So here's the summary. We experience making decisions subjectively and observe the objective actions that follow. This subjective experience is the most direct type of experience possible, even more so than the empirical evidence, and it is common to all people. Whether we start from observation or from actions and backtrack, they all seem to point towards the same direction, consciousness and free will, which are the powers of the self. There also seems to be a symmetry between the reaction and action of matter and the consciousness and free will of the self, where consciousness is a reaction that does not interfere with the world, but can observe it as well as having the power to self-observe, whereas free will is like an action that isn't caused by anything external and is self-caused. Consciousness and free will create a feedback loop that allows us to reshape the world. No physical matter has such self-referential properties, and therefore the self could only be axiomatic. Furthermore, any argument against free will is self-defeating, as you have no way of knowing if you are determined to believe a lie. And you cannot question consciousness either, as you require consciousness to question itself. Even if free will was an illusion, it seems to be purposeless at best, as you could easily imagine being an automata without it. Therefore, it is an extra unresolved problem for the evolution of an illusion without any utility. Lastly, following Occam's razor, free will is a much simpler explanation. And the idea that the self is an illusion, there is no free will, and life has no meaning sounds like philosophy run amok, or a bad conspiracy theory, leaving even more questions than answers. That's the gist of it, and if we put all these arguments together, they make a much more compelling case than any one individually. But that's not the end of it. Actually, there is just one more thing to consider, and that's the great burden the skeptics bear. As many of you know, we have a blind spot in each of our eyes, but we don't see it because the brain creates a sort of illusion to fill in the blank. This is an example of a real illusion our brain creates, but you wouldn't believe me if I didn't provide any evidence for it, would you? Imagine if I told you that you actually have a second blind spot and that it is your responsibility to prove to me that it's not there. That wouldn't sound right. If I claim that there is a unicorn flying through the sky, I have to give the evidence. But if there is something we can all see, such as this cup, if you claimed that it was an illusion, that would be on you to give the evidence for that, not on me. That's why the great burden that the free will skeptics carry is actually the burden of proof. Since free will is something we can all directly experience, I don't even need the collective evidence I just mentioned. All that is necessary is the most banal first argument of common experience. After that, all I have to do is disprove any counter-evidence from the skeptics, and there is no good counter-evidence. That's why this places the burden of proof in the S tier. Just to be clear, there are numerous scientific experiments done that supposedly show that we have no free will, and as good as the evidence they have collected is, it has nothing to do with free will. The conclusion simply does not follow from the evidence, and is caused by hidden assumptions and a complete misunderstanding of the nature of free will. As Einstein once said, the man of science is a poor philosopher. That's enough for now, so if you want to find out exactly why the claim that there is no free will does not follow from the evidence, check out my next video. If you want to find out why free will is logically consistent, Check out the rest of the free will playlist.